So I do not have any control over advancing the slides.
I would be happy to click through the slides for you, Kevin.
Thank you. There we go. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're going to try to provide an overview of aligning technology roadmap with compliance. You know, these days it's not just enough to have technology working and giving us the information we need. We've got compliance issues. During the presentation, there will be opportunities for polls, so we'll ask questions, and you can respond to those questions using our texting app. And if you will, send the text to that 22333 with the message of Dean Dorton, it will join you right session, so then you can text whatever responses. Usually it's an A, B, C, or D to that, and get live polling updates that we can show part of the presentation. So our objective first, what the data protection regulations looks, and then talk about the easy path or the harder path. And then after that, Polina will talk about the foundational security program steps and the proactive approach to accomplishing that. All right, so let's look at what data protection regulations are out there. I've started with what I call cross-border international. So my definition of this is data that exists in another country, but we have to comply with those. You know, as opposed, there's plenty of data regulatory issues in other countries where you've got to be a resident, you've got to be doing business there, and it applies just to those people within your geographic boundaries. But there are plenty of regulatory requirements that can be anywhere else in the world, and if you have data on one of their citizens or businesses, you've got to comply. Here's just some examples. Brazil has it, Canada, Japan. I think we're all most familiar with GDPR, but again, there are more. China's got one, but they haven't finalized it yet, but China will make that list before too long. Now, if we actually get into the US borders, here are some common regulatory requirements. So HIPAA is the healthcare, GLBA is for banking, actually banking and higher education fall under GLBA, PCI for credit cards. NIST 800-171 historically has not been a regulatory requirement. It was just a standard. However, a number of governmental agencies are adopting NIST as an actual regulatory requirement. And if I look in the crystal ball, I anticipate that a lot, if not all or most, of government agencies at the time will be adopting 171 as a security requirement. And that means to get grants or to do business with federal government agencies, they'll want you to do some kind of NIST 800-171 compliance assessment. Sarbanes-Oxley's been around for a while, FFIEC for financial industry. That one in the bottom row middle is CMMC. That's the Department of Defense compliance requirement. It's essentially NIST 800-171 with teeth. So it's more developed. The Department of Defense they adopted NIST 800-171 a long time ago. And in order to try to make defense contractors be more accountable, they put some teeth to the process. They're still rolling that out, but again, it's impacting enough organizations. Then we've got state and local. So most states, I think maybe all at this point, have some type of data breach notification law. Some have data breach laws. So for instance, California has been compared to GDPR. So California has most stringent data protection in the country, but all the states are have moved towards that direction or are moving in that direction. So if you're doing business in multiple states, multiple requirements that you got to stay on top of. And again, like I mentioned earlier, federal government, state grants and contracts to include some type of security compliance requirement. So we're seeing this across the board, not like it was 10 or 15 years ago. The rest of the data at a very fast. Now, if you look at worldwide, what this particular slide shows, and the darker green are the areas that actually have legislation for data privacy or data security. On the other end, on the gray, and you can see there's a handful of countries gray. They're just not developed well enough to really have much of an infrastructure, let alone have any kind of legislation applying. And all the countries in between are in some sort of stage or process. You can see there's a lot of worldwide regulatory requirements. Now, the other piece to that, that's on the slide, is actual enforcement. So it's one thing to have legislation effective. It's another to have teeth behind it. So the red are the countries that have teeth behind their legislation. And when you get all the way down to the gray or the green, they've got little to no teeth too. So if you're doing business internationally, it's a double-edged sword. The benefit to doing business in a country that's in the red, especially, is they've got tough data protection laws in place, or will do something about it to do business in those countries. Now, the other side of that coin is you also have to do more compliance. You've got more compliance requirements, but that's the intent of compliance, is to make things secure. Now, and this slide actually isn't titled appropriately. This is really highly regulated industries or areas. So if the credit card's more of an area, because that's cross industry. If you're dealing with credit cards, you've got cybersecurity requirements. Now the others, Department of Defense, energy, finance, healthcare, and higher education, those are all highly regulated industries. And what's interesting about this, higher education would not have made this list, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but they do now. I mentioned GLBA earlier, so any college or university that does student financial aid falls under GLBA. And a lot of universities have grants with the Department of Defense, and that brings in CMMC, and we've seen FDA contracts with similar requirements and a few other governmental agencies. But anyway, I wouldn't be surprised if if we look at this 4 or 5 years later that the list got. But anyway, if you're in one of these industries, you're dealing with this on a regular basis. The other category is self-regulated. So if you're not in one of those industries, or even if you're in those industries and you have multiple compliance, what we're seeing is people taking advantage of a system and organization controls report. Now, this is something you as an organization can have done. You're in control of the process, but you bring in an independent firm. They do have to be a CPA firm, because this is a CPA project, but it's an audit of controls. And what you can do with this is, especially if you have an organization where you may have vendors, customers that are sending you these questionnaires about your cyber program, and you're spending a lot of time filling out these 60-page questionnaires, and each questionnaire is different. what we've seen is some organizations can do a stock report, which is kind of a proactive approach to those questionnaires. And instead of completing them or maybe shortening the parts they do have to answer, they can send their stock report back to the vendor and save themselves a lot of time. So in the SOC area, the organizations that are most commonly doing this are what you would think of as the kind of the SaaS niche out there. So you have an application that's hosted on offsite backup to the cloud would be in this category. We're seeing benefit plans, engineering firms, financial advisors, law firms, even managed services, outsourced IT, because they tend to have the keys to the kingdom and may come across or see sensitive data. So it's important for them. Outsourced, any kind of outsource, we think of ADP and a lot of other payroll companies. That's a third party. They've got sensitive data and building processing. So we're seeing a lot of industries and companies that are finding benefit in SOC. Why have a SOC? The number one reason, and this is, I'd say about at least 80% of the time that we do a SOC report for an organization is for that one reason at the time. And that's because they have a customer. Usually it's a significant or major customer. They talk to them and say, oh, wow, you're doing some work for us and you have sensitive data. Well, we need to make sure that your operations are going to be available. Need it, we want you to get a SOC. And when a customer who's paying you a lot of money says those words, you usually jump and say, well, we need that level of assurance and confidence that we're secure. We need some measure to be able to provide that information. And the SOC reports, honestly, it's the best product on the market that can provide your customers that level of assurance. Because again, an independent party's coming in and doing an audit and giving them the second one, and I'd say out of the 20% left in the pie, the second one takes up at least 15 to maybe the next two bullet points. To 19%. And we're seeing organizations using this as a competitive advantage. And that is when they're going and they're meeting with prospective customers, they will say, we have on an annual basis, we're having this SOC report done. You can feel comfortable keeping data secure. And so the marketing departments love that. And again, it helps with the sales process. Sometimes, let's go back to that real quick. The next probably worth mentioning is sometimes, actually, I had this request at least once or twice in the last 3 weeks where an organization wants to respond to an RFP, but one of the RFP requirements is you will have a SOC report. And it's a real, I'll say, a pain point. If your RFP is due in 4 weeks and you want to have a SOC report done, you're not, it won't happen. So having it done in advance so you can meet those future needs. Again, there's a lot of organizations I'd wish I'd had that conversation with, probably about 5 or 6 months before they had to respond to that RFP. Okay, that's enough on that one. Thanks, Polina. And there are 3 types of SOC reports. The first one is controls over financial reporting. That's the SOC 1. SOC 2 is reporting on one of 5 trust service categories. And then a SOC 3, I'm not going to talk much. I don't know that anyone's doing SOC 3 reports. It's one of those things that the AICPA develops, but I don't think had any real world applicability. But the SOC 1, that was ideal for those outsourced like bill payment process, accounts payable, payroll, where maybe you a customer feeds information into your environment, financial information, dollars and cents, and then you do something with it, some formula and the output's a different number. So you're actually processing financial or making financial transactions, and so the SOC 1's designed real well for that. And the nice benefit about a SOC 1 is you as the organization, along with the audit use, you create the list of control. It's not predefined, which is a big difference on SOC 2, where the SOC 2 is designed to cover security, confidentiality, privacy, availability, processing integrity, and that's a set list of controls. So in all SOC 2 reports that have to do with security tested the same way and are against the same measurements. And so the SOC 2 is really, from a security standpoint, the one that is beneficial. So let me talk about the two roads, and I'm going to go through the next few slides a little more quickly. So my definition of the two roads is you can satisfy, there's a way to satisfy compliance, and then there's another road, the one less traveled, where you can satisfy compliance, actually improve your security posture. So let's look at the next, we'll go through the next 2 or 3 slides quickly. So the data protection road, and I think these slides have gotten out of order. Let's just go to the next one, Polina. Or missing one. Tell you what, missing a slide in. Let me just explain it. So the compliance road is just a checkbox mentality. When it says, you have to have this documentation in place or something else, you just go through and do the bare minimum. And it might not even pass muster if somebody turned the stone over a little bit and investigated. But on paper, it looks good. And that's the checkbox mentality. The actual security program element of it is, let's try to get more benefit than just compliance. Let's make sure our security program is solid in place and we get some benefit out of this. And I think almost all the time when I have a conversation with someone says, all right, you've got the choice. Do you want to just check the box, or do you want to actually get some value out of this? And I think without exception, people recognize the importance of getting some value out of that. So to go down that path, though, it takes these 3 areas, and the security program itself is not the starting point. The data inventory and security framework are really foundational items. And so the data inventory, basically you're trying to answer these 3 questions. What is the data? Where is it located? And who is it important to? So the what, geography, or no, that's the second one. I'm sorry. The what is the data? What applications, ERP, databases, whatever it may be, what is the data? Then where it's located is the geography. And it's important to know if it's on premise or hosted. Now the who, that can be answered, or that's really a multi-layered question. So let's take first of all, who internally is that data important to? So this would be like a data owner. This is the person that basically what that data is, what it's being used for. But the other layer for who is who outside your organization is that data important to. And I'm not talking about just customers. I'm talking about like those first slides when it comes to compliance. Does the EU care about your data because you have data on somebody in Spain, or do you have data in California? Do you have credit card information? So if you have those types of data, the who becomes somebody, some regulatory body, and it's important to know that. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but I wanted to make sure it was in the slides so you had it for your records. This is just probably good data to have if you're doing a data inventory. This is a little bit more detail on the who. So when we do a data inventory, we identify which regulatory requirements are applicable, because and Polina's gonna what she's gonna cover really gonna I think show this even better, is when you're making changes or implementing things you're do with requirement, because there's a lot of redundancy here. Let's look at it in total so that you make changes that satisfy all of what's applicable. There are various control frameworks, and what these do is they provide you some guidance and structure on what kind of controls should be in place. And there's multiple frameworks out there. We tend to, and on the next, let's go ahead to the next slide. So the next slide has, really, it's kind of an example. This is actually a real life example of a recommendation we made to an organization. After we got an understanding of their environment and we'd done a data inventory, we kind of evaluated security frameworks. And you can see, again, what fits best for your organization could be completely different. But in this particular case, we realized that one of the two NIST frameworks really was, and actually this is a little outdated today. The NIST 800-171 for this organization has been the top list for sure. But what we did was we looked at all the different regulatory requirements that are applied to their organization, and when we compared them, we identified that NIST was the best one. The others have some value and benefit. It just depends on the size, complexity of your environment, and what that data inventory. It kind of realistically, it kind of tells you which one is going to be the right one. It's usually not. There's not any guesswork by the time you got to that point. And then the last step. None of these steps are small, and you could make a very good argument that this one is the biggest, the most costliest, and the one that takes the most time. So just because it looks small on this diagram, that's probably a misrepresentation. So to tackle that, I'm going to turn it over to Polina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Polina Nikolova, and I lead our managed services team, which focuses a lot on the day-to-day support needs in IT administration. Or as I like to say, Kevin finds all of the things that we need to address, and then he turns over the hard work to us to actually address them and make sure that on the technical side, at least, a lot of these findings are actually addressed and taken care of. So let's start with the polling question. How prepared are you to address your compliance assessment findings? Thinking back through some of the things Kevin just mentioned and all of the requirements, how prepared do you feel? Let's see if we start to get some responses here. Don't know where to start. Sounds like the majority of our responses are, I don't know where to start, or somewhat prepared. And I think that's fairly common. So let's take a look. Where should we start? What should we be thinking about? It's important to understand that an information security program, a lot of the things that Kevin talked about, it is not just an IT focused area. You have administrative and operational functions and processes and policies that you have to think about. Whether it's HR, administration, operations, accounting, those are all different departments and functions that should be involved in establishing your roadmap and addressing a lot of these findings and requirements. We have to think about the physical security. security systems, access control systems, the physical security of the building or office suite. And then you have the technical aspect of it. You have the servers and the endpoints and everything that goes along with the cybersecurity risk specific to our systems and endpoints. And with more applications shifting to the cloud as a software as a service offering, we also have to think about vendor risk management or third-party risk management. So you can see how there are multiple different categories, and it's not just something that is specifically a technical or IT function. And today we'll focus on addressing those technical requirements and specifically cybersecurity risk related to network security, systems and endpoints, user account and password security, and cybersecurity common controls. And how does proactive monitoring and management of cybersecurity risk help you feel more prepared to address and be ready to address some of your compliance requirements? So thinking proactively. Why is that important? It helps you feel prepared. It puts your mind at ease. You feel ready to tackle your next compliance assessment. And when Kevin comes along with his list of questions, then you have a lot of these answers and you can be well prepared. And something that can help you prepare for a lot of the technical requirements is establishing a cybersecurity program and having that in place, continuously evaluating cybersecurity risk within the organization, identifying it, developing the cybersecurity roadmap, and monitoring and making changes to adapt it to fit your business needs and changes. And what is a cybersecurity roadmap? It's something that can help you, the roadmap can help you align with your chosen, with the framework that you've chosen to meet your objectives and your compliance needs. It can support these objectives. And it's something that should be continuously adapted to make sure that as changes happen within your technology, within your business, that the cybersecurity roadmap adapts to these changes. All right, where do we start? First, we have to establish and understand the objectives. Having visibility, knowing where cybersecurity risk exists, knowing what we have, where the data is, what it is, who is responsible, who is the data owner, or who needs to access this information. We need to have visibility and know where the items that we need to address. And then we need to develop a plan. Identify the tools and the resources we need to execute the plan. Do we need additional licensing? Do we need additional monitoring tools? What has to be in place for us to be able to successfully develop and adopt the cybersecurity program? And there's always the consideration of budgeting and time and resources. And is this something that aligns? Is this something that we can do this calendar year as we do budgeting and planning for the upcoming calendar year or fiscal year? How do we align this to fit our budget and our timeline and the resources that we have available to us? And then how do we track progress and adapt to changes? Here's some key cybersecurity considerations, things that you should be thinking about. Can you identify the critical systems within your environment? Do you know where critical or sensitive data is stored? Have you implemented multi-factor authentication or identity access management? Do you have a proactive cybersecurity program to monitor and detect risk within your systems? And how prepared do you feel to respond to a cybersecurity incident or recover from a critical system event or attack? And let's go to another polling question. Were you able to confidently answer all questions on the previous slide? We'll wait for some of the responses. We're seeing some no. For now, we're seeing all no. No one seems to be able, okay, some, but not all. We're seeing a good mix of all. But no one who is able to confidently answer all of the questions, which means we don't have full visibility into cybersecurity risk within our organization today. And that's unfortunately, it's very common. We don't understand what's out there, and therefore it's difficult to address or fix some of these things and do so proactively on a continuous basis. So having visibility and understanding, this is where an effective cybersecurity program can bring a lot of value. It can evaluate different categories and indicate deficiencies in each category specific to technical cybersecurity risks within the organization. And having visibility helps you prepare a plan, helps you list action items, things that you can tackle, their priority, and indicating the priority goes hand in hand with establishing a budget, right? You want to start with the highest priority items, the ones that once you address them, that will make the biggest impact in reducing cybersecurity risk within the organization. Establishing a timeline and budget and tracking progress. So how do we do this? We want to be able to see a list of action items. We need to know what the timeline is. Who is responsible for making this happen? So what you see on the slide here is something that we have used as a tool to track and indicate the priority of each cybersecurity risk, timeline, the action item, of course, timeline of when this can be in place, depending on the resources available, budget, any considerations to business needs or times that the business is more downtime or off season. And then tracking who is assigned to address this specific risk. Is it pending approval? Do we need user communication? Do we need to engage resources from different departments to provide feedback on how this can be executed and addressed? So having something like this, being able to have a visual and a tracking element to addressing each of the categories, that is something that is very important in being able to stay proactive on a lot of these items. Here are some examples of action items, things you can track, things that should be part of your cybersecurity risk management program. What tools do we need? As we start planning for this and budgeting for this, it's important to evaluate the tools we have today. A lot of times security tools may have some overlap. You may have some existing licensing for Microsoft 365 that provides some spam filtering security options. It provides some endpoint security, endpoint management, and some advanced security options that you also have in other tools. You may have a separate email spam filtering solution or next-gen antivirus or endpoint detection and response system. You may have some overlap in these tools. So being able to take a step back and evaluate what do we have today and what do we need to have in place to support our cybersecurity roadmap and address some of these items. What is the cost? How many licenses do we need? When should we buy them? Which quarter of the year? Just planning ahead for those things. It seems like a lot of small details, but it's really something that is important in outlining early on so you have a plan and you can communicate to the end users. And that communication is key in our next topic here for common controls, user awareness training. Making sure that end users are trained on the latest cybersecurity trends and what we're seeing and what they should be aware of. So giving them that training and preparing them for what to expect is a key step in an effective cybersecurity program. And it has to be we have to engage all employees. It has to be continuous and relevant. Highlighting the latest cybersecurity trends and activity that we see on the cybersecurity side. And it also has to be engaging. It has to be something that you're end users want to participate in. It doesn't take up a lot of their time. It highlights the key focus areas that we need to make sure we communicate on. And backups, another critical component of addressing cybersecurity and minimizing cybersecurity risk is having backups that are reliable and effective. And following the 3-2-1 rule, having 3 copies of your data on 2 different types of media, at least one of them being in an off-site location. And thinking about immutability, encryption, and multi-factor authentication for added security when it comes to your backups. The budget and timeline considerations, and this is often something that we place focus on, but it becomes difficult as you engage more different departments or you consider different preferences, and the timeline can shift and change. But what's important here is communication. Communicating to the end users, making sure that they understand the changes that are happening, what is outlined on your roadmap in terms of technical requirements or changes. And change is scary for a lot of people. And having that communication, knowing what to expect ahead of time, that really goes a long way in making sure that any cybersecurity improvements, any changes on the technical side are very well executed and minimize the downtime or the doubt that the user may have and how this change will affect them. We touched on adapting the roadmap to change. And what does that really mean? It could be change in the organizational structure or growth, change in your processes and functions, new departments or different ways that your departments function, adapting it to your budget, to fit your budget. We may have a list of cybersecurity requirements that we absolutely have to address. But let's start at the top. Let's start with the highest priority. Let's start with the ones that will make the biggest impact in minimizing cybersecurity risk, and then evaluate what can we do this year? What has a lower priority or maybe a lower risk to the organization in terms of cybersecurity, and we can maybe push back until Q4 or maybe until next year. And let's really understand how each of these things impacts our cybersecurity posture. Technology life cycles can also impact how we change or how we need to adapt our cybersecurity roadmap and our technology plan, and changes in regulatory requirements. And thinking about new vendors and agreements, this is something that happens all the time. We start working with a new vendor or we sign a new contract, and it's, again, something that we need to be considerate of as we adapt our cybersecurity roadmap to support these changes. Other technology roadmap considerations are, we talked about hardware life cycles and software life cycles. If we have a legacy system that needs to be decommissioned or taken out of service, we're replacing it or upgrading it, we're adding a virtual machine or a server. These are all things, these are changes that impact our cybersecurity roadmap. And when we talk about continuous monitoring, when we talk about continuous assessment, this is why. It's because this change does happen, and we need to make sure that we continue to assess our cybersecurity risks and consider the changes that are happening as well. The evaluation of software as a service and infrastructure as a service solutions, those are platforms that, again, challenge us to think in a different way and adapt the cybersecurity roadmap to evaluate and indicate risk in those areas also. And validating controls, we talked about the changes that are happening. We talked about the need to continuously evaluate what changes have happened on our network on the technical side, changes related to policies and procedures, changes related to vendors, hardware and software life cycles. And these are some of the things that can help us make sure that we're actually catching them and considering these changes and making, adapting our cybersecurity roadmap to support them. change control, continuous cybersecurity assessments, and continuously auditing our policies and procedures. And as we discussed in one of the previous slides, it's not only IT, and it's not only a specific function. It's not one single tool or one single business unit or a person or a process that will complete your cybersecurity program. To go beyond the cybersecurity component of it and focus on a full information security program, it takes people, technology, and processes, and all three things working together to make sure that it's effective. And lastly, we'll share some resources with you where you can find additional information on Dean Dorton, the services we provide, and some remote work tools and cybersecurity tools that you can read more about. If you have any questions, feel free to use the chat function, and Julia will let me know. We don't have any questions at this time, but feel free to, we have the contact information listed on the last slide. Feel free to reach out to Kevin or me and send in any questions. We appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.